Chapter 1. The Rescue. At the construction site of Albury Construction's newest luxury development, in the heart of Newport Beach, California, the sun beat down mercilessly. Men worked tirelessly under the command of Robert Albury, 58, one of the country's biggest real estate moguls. In an impeccable suit despite the heat, he walked the grounds with the keen eye of someone who had built an empire from scratch. "I want this structure ready by Friday. I don't care how many shifts they have to work," Robert ordered the chief engineer, who merely nodded. No one dared to question his orders. The deafening noise of jackhammers, concrete mixers, and hammering created a familiar symphony to the businessman's ears. This would be his 40th development in the wonderful city. Another high-rise apartment building that promised breathtaking views of the ocean and Laguna Beach. Robert consulted his gold watch, an inheritance from his father, his only truly personal possession, when something unusual made him stop. A sound, different from anything heard on that site. A rhythmic, almost imperceptible sound coming from underground. "Stop the machines!" he shouted, raising his right hand in the air. The workers exchanged confused glances. The chief engineer approached. "Is there a problem, Mr. Albury?" "Silence," he ordered, leaning towards the ground. "Do you hear that?" No one heard anything but the wind that occasionally blew, bringing the smell of sea air mixed with fresh concrete. Robert walked in circles, trying to identify the source of that sound. It was like a light, constant tapping. There, he pointed to a specific spot where excavation would begin the next day. "Sir, there's nothing there. It's just earth that still needs to be removed for the foundations," the engineer explained. Robert ignored the comment and approached the spot. He crouched down, contradicting his own image of a man who would never dirty a $10,000 Italian suit. He put his ear to the ground. "Bring shovels." "Quickly." The workers hesitated, looking at the engineer for confirmation. "Didn't you hear?" "I want to dig here now," Robert insisted, already removing his jacket and rolling up his shirt sleeves. "Mr. Albury, we have a schedule to follow. This area will be excavated tomorrow with the backhoes and to hell with the schedule. There's something down here, something alive." The word alive caused a murmur among the workers. Some approached with tools, but Robert pushed them away, taking a shovel from one of their hands. To everyone's surprise, the real estate magnate, known for his coldness and detachment, began to dig frantically. "The boss has gone mad," one worker whispered to another. The engineer tried to intervene again. "Sir, let the men do it. You'll hurt yourself or ruin your suit." Robert continued digging, now with his hands, feeling the damp earth under his impeccable nails. His instinct screamed that something was there, something that needed to be found. After a few minutes, his hands touched something cold and metallic. His eyes gleamed. "Here. Help me here." The workers approached, and together they unearthed a metal box similar to an old chest, but sealed with industrial adhesive tapes. Silence fell over the construction site as Robert, with trembling hands, began to remove the tapes. Upon opening the box, the businessman recoiled in horror. Inside was a girl appearing to be about 10 years old, covered in dirt, curled up like a fetus, with her eyes closed, breathing with difficulty. "My God! A child! Call the paramedics, now!" The girl, weak and dehydrated, slightly opened her eyes, meeting Robert's startled gaze. Her parched lips moved, but no sound came out. The businessman, without a second thought, took the child into his arms, ignoring the dirt that now stained his white shirt. "Hold on, little one. Everything will be all right." In minutes, an ambulance arrived at the scene. Robert refused to hand the girl over to the paramedics, insisting on carrying her personally to the stretcher. Only when they saw her being attended to did he allow someone to clean his dirt-covered hands. Who would do such a thing? He asked aloud, watching the ambulance leave with its siren wailing. Journalists were already gathering at the construction site entrance, alerted by the workers themselves through messages and videos that quickly circulated. Flashes went off in Robert's direction, who was still in shock. "Mr. Albury, is it true that you found a child buried? Was she alive? How did you discover her?" Robert ignored all questions and got into his car, heading to the hospital. That day would change his life forever, though he didn't know it yet. At St. Jude's City Hospital, the girl was immediately taken to the pediatric ICU. Robert, still in his dirty clothes, waited in the hallway when Dr. Victoria Campbell, the chief physician, came to meet him. "So, doctor, how is she?" "Stable but very weak. She's dehydrated and showing signs of hypothermia." "If it weren't for you—" Robert lowered his eyes, uncomfortable with what seemed to be a compliment. "How did she end up there?" "Who would do that to a child?" "The police are already investigating." "She had no documents, no identification. How long was she down there?" "It's hard to say precisely, but it couldn't have been more than a day. Any longer and she wouldn't have survived." The doctor's words weighed on Robert like fresh concrete. If the excavations had been scheduled for the following week, as originally planned, the girl would never have been found alive. "Can I see her?" The doctor hesitated, but something in the determined look of that man convinced her. "Only for a few minutes. She needs rest." In the room, surrounded by machines and with an oxygen mask, the girl seemed even smaller and more fragile. Robert approached cautiously, as if fearing to break her with a sudden movement. "Hi," he whispered, not knowing what else to say. The girl slowly opened her eyes. Brown and deep, they fixed on Robert with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "You're safe now," he assured her, feeling something strange in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades. "What's your name?" She removed the oxygen mask with effort and answered in a whisper, "Louisa." Robert felt a shiver run down his spine. Louisa was the name of his mother, who had passed away when he was only 12. Coincidence? "Louisa," he repeated, feeling the name as something familiar. "I'm Robert. I'm the one who found you." The girl merely nodded before the doctor indicated that their time was up. Robert reluctantly left the room, not without looking one last time at that child who, for some inexplicable reason, had awakened something dormant within him. Outside the hospital, dozens of reporters awaited him. Cameras, microphones, questions being thrown from all sides. The news of the magnate who saved a buried child was already on all news portals. "Mr. Albury, you're a hero!" Robert got into his car without answering, but a question echoed in his mind. Who was that girl? And why did he feel that somehow their lives were destined to cross paths? Chapter 2. Silences and Barriers. 3 days after the rescue, Robert Albury parked his BMW at the entrance of St. Jude's City Hospital. He adjusted his tie, took a deep breath and picked up the bouquet of sunflowers he had bought on the way. His secretary, Marcia, had called that morning to inform him that the girl would be discharged, but no one had appeared to pick her up. "Mr. Albury, what a surprise!" exclaimed social worker Claudia Mendoza upon seeing him enter the reception. "We weren't expecting you here today." "I came to check on the girl Louisa," he said, trying to sound casual. "I heard she's been discharged." "Yes, her health has improved considerably, but—" The social worker's hesitation was evident. Robert raised an eyebrow, indicating for her to continue. "We haven't been able to locate any family members. She's not in any missing children's registry, has no documentation. It's as if she doesn't officially exist." Robert felt something tighten in his chest. "And what happens to her now?" "Well, normally she would be sent to a state shelter until we could resolve her legal situation. But with the current overcrowding—" Before he could think of the consequences of his words, Robert heard himself say, "I can take her." The social worker's eyes widened. "Excuse me, doctor?" "Temporarily," he quickly added, surprised by his own suggestion, "until a more suitable solution is found." "That's unusual. You would have to go through a temporary guardianship process, and honestly, I don't know if I have resources, time and space. So it's certainly better than an overcrowded shelter," Robert argued, using the same decisive tone as in his business meetings. 2 hours and many phone calls later, Robert waited in the hallway while the social worker spoke with Louisa. The system had been made more flexible due to the businessman's influence and his promise to hire the best specialists to care for the child's physical and psychological well-being. When the door opened, Louisa appeared wearing simple clothes donated by the hospital. Her eyes, still wary, scrutinized Robert from head to toe. He tried to smile but realized he had forgotten how to do it naturally. "Hello, Louisa," he said, offering the sunflowers. "Do you remember me?" The girl nodded but didn't take the flowers. Robert cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "You'll be staying at my house for a while." "Is that okay with you?" Louisa shrugged, showing neither enthusiasm nor rejection. The social worker intervened. Louisa isn't communicating much. Yet, Mr. Aubrey, the psychologist believes it's a response to the trauma. I understand. Robert extended his hand to the girl. Shall we go? To his surprise, Louisa took his hand but maintained a safe distance, as if ready to flee at the slightest sign of danger. On the way to the mansion in Pelican Hill, a prestigious neighborhood in Newport Beach, the silence was broken only by the soft sound of the radio. Robert, accustomed to solitude, suddenly felt uncomfortable with it. He occasionally looked in the rearview mirror, seeing Louisa contemplating the landscape out the window, her face an indecipherable mask. "My house is big," he said, trying to start a conversation. "It has a beautiful garden. Maybe you'll like it." No response. "Do you like anything in particular? Food, games, cartoons?" Silence. Upon their arrival, Mrs. Zilder, the housekeeper, waited at the door, visibly nervous. In 30 years of working for Robert, she had never seen him bring a child home. "Welcome, dear," Mrs. Zilder said with a warm smile. "I've prepared a very nice room for you." Louisa looked at the imposing house with its 3 floors, glass walls, and minimalist design. It looked like a giant aquarium, cold and impersonal. "Show her the room, Zilder," Robert ordered, returning to his usual commanding tone. "And prepare something for us to eat. Something children like." "Yes, sir." The room prepared for Louisa was spacious and elegant, but completely devoid of any childish elements. Mrs. Zilder, noticing this, promised to buy some toys and children's books the next day. "If you need anything, just call me, dear," the housekeeper said before leaving her alone. Louisa sat on the edge of the king-size bed, her feet dangling without reaching the floor. She looked around at the white walls and minimalist furniture. There were no photos, no colors. It was as if the house was a large hospital. During dinner, Robert observed with concern that Louisa merely poked at her food without actually eating it. "Don't you like lasagna?" he asked. The girl didn't answer. "We can order something else. Pizza, hamburger, whatever you want." Silence. "Oh, Louisa, you need to eat to regain your strength," Robert insisted, his voice betraying genuine concern. Slowly, the girl brought a small piece to her mouth, chewing without enthusiasm. In the following weeks, the routine at the Albury mansion completely changed. Robert, who normally spent all day at the construction company, began working more from home. He brought psychologists, nutritionists, and pedagogues to evaluate Louisa, but the girl refused to interact with any of them. At night, Robert frequently found her sleeping on the floor, curled up in a corner of the room, even with the comfortable bed available. The 3rd time this happened, he carefully picked her up and placed her in bed, covering her. That's when he noticed the tear marks on her face. Something inside him broke at that moment. The next morning, Robert cancelled all his meetings and took Louisa to a toy store. The saleswoman, recognizing the famous businessman, was surprised to see him accompanied by a child. "You can choose whatever you want," he told Louisa, who looked at the colorful shelves with astonishment. For several minutes, the girl just walked through the aisles, timidly touching the toys as if afraid of breaking them. Finally, she stopped in front of a clay modeling kit. "Do you want this?" Robert asked, surprised by the simple choice. Louisa nodded slightly. "Only that?" "Are you sure? You can choose more things." But the girl had already headed to the cashier with the clay kit in her hands. Robert, confused, followed her, buying the item and a few more toys and books that the saleswoman suggested for children of that age. At home, Louisa immediately opened the clay kit and began modeling small figures on the living room floor, ignoring the other toys. Robert watched her from a distance, not wanting to interrupt that moment of concentration, the first sign of genuine interest the girl had shown in anything. After a few hours, Louisa stood up and placed a small sculpture on the coffee table. It was a simple human figure, but clearly molded with care. "Is this for me?" Robert asked, surprised. Louisa nodded and returned to her work with the clay. That night, for the first time, the girl ate her entire meal. Small progress, Robert thought. The next morning, he found a note taped to the refrigerator door, written in childish, uneven letters, "Thank you for the clay." Robert felt something strange, a warm sensation in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. He took the note and carefully put it in his wallet. Meanwhile, the world outside was not as calm as the Albury mansion. Reports speculated about the identity of the girl found at the construction site. Some newspapers insinuated that the businessman was using the case to clean up his public image, known for controversial business practices. Others questioned how a child had ended up buried on his property. "Mr. Albury, the press office is asking for an official statement," Marcia informed him over the phone. "And the administrative board wants an urgent meeting." "Tell everyone I'm unavailable," he replied dryly. "But, sir, shares have fallen 3% since the incident. Investors are nervous. Their problem." Robert hung up the phone and returned to observing Louisa, who was now molding something that looked like a house with the clay. For the first time in decades, stock market numbers seemed insignificant. That night, passing by the girl's room to check if she was asleep, Robert found her in bed, but with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep?" he asked, stopping at the door. To his surprise, Louisa replied, "I'm afraid of the dark." These were the first words she had spoken since arriving at the mansion. Robert felt a lump in his throat. "I can leave a light on if you want." "Can you stay until I fall asleep?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Robert hesitated for only a second before entering and sitting on the edge of the bed. "Of course I can," he replied, realizing there was nothing in the world that would make him say no to that request. In a few minutes, Louisa fell asleep, her breathing soft and rhythmic. Robert remained there, observing that mysterious child who, without him understanding how, had begun to tear down one by one the walls he had built around his heart. Chapter 3. External Storms. A month had passed since Louisa's arrival at the Albury mansion. Mornings now had a new routine. Robert had breakfast with the girl before going to the office, something unthinkable in his previous life. The dining table, once occupied only by spreadsheets and contracts, now held colorful drawings and small clay sculptures. "I need to go to work," Robert announced, adjusting his tie. "Mrs. Zilder will be with you. If you need anything, just ask." Louisa nodded, concentrating on spreading jam on her toast. Her brown hair, once dull, now shone under the morning light, coming through the panoramic windows. "What time will you be back?" she asked without looking up. Robert felt that now familiar warmth in his chest. Small questions like this still surprised him, signs that Louisa was beginning to care about his presence. "Before dinner, I promise," he replied, hesitating before adding, "Would you like me to bring anything for you?" The girl finally looked up. "More clay?" "Mine is running out." Of course, Robert smiled, realizing it was the first time Louisa had asked for something directly. At Albury Construction, the atmosphere was tense when Robert arrived. His assistant greeted him with a worried expression. "Mr. Albury, the board has been waiting for you for an hour." "We didn't schedule a meeting for today," he replied, heading to his office. "It was an emergency summons. Sir, Mr. Menzies insisted on your presence." Robert sighed deeply. Henry Menzies, the board president and his brother-in-law, represented the interests of the other shareholders, interests that rarely aligned with Robert's personal values, especially lately. "Send them in," he finally conceded. Minutes later, 5 men in suits entered the room, led by Henry, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a severe expression. "Robert, you finally honor us with your presence," Henry began, not hiding his irony. "We need to discuss the elephant in the room." "If the elephant has a name, say it," Robert retorted, sitting in his chair. Henry threw several magazines and newspapers onto the table. The headlines varied, but all mentioned Robert and the mysterious girl from the construction site. One of them caught his eye. "Construction magnate uses orphan to clean. Image after environmental scandals. This is affecting business." "Robert," Henry declared, "investors are restless. The stock value has dropped 7% since you decided to play social worker." "I saved a child's life." "Henry, it wasn't a marketing ploy. No one is questioning the rescue, but rather what happened afterward. Why take her to your home? Why get personally involved? This has created too much speculation." Robert remained silent, his fingers drumming on the table. "The board suggests that you disassociate yourself from the girl. Donate a generous sum to a quality shelter, and let the state take care of her, as it should have been from the beginning," Henry continued. "No." The word came out firmer than Robert intended. The board members exchanged glances, surprised by the vehemence of his refusal. "Be reasonable, Robert," another board member insisted. "Think of the company, of the thousands of jobs that depend on our decisions. Louisa stays with me, and this matter is not open for discussion." Henry stood up, adjusting his jacket. "You've always been stubborn, but never irrational. This girl is changing you, and not for the better. The board will vote this afternoon on your temporary removal from the presidency if you insist on this madness." "Do what you think is best," Robert replied, maintaining an outward calm that hid the storm within him. "But remember that I am still the majority shareholder." After the board members left, Robert remained motionless, gazing at the Newport Beach skyline through his office window. For the first time in his career, corporate threats seemed hollow compared to the promise he had made to himself to protect Louisa. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Louisa experienced her first day at the private school where Robert had enrolled her. Mrs. Zilder picked her up at dismissal time, anxious to know how the experience had been. "How was your day, dear?" the housekeeper asked as she drove back home. Louisa shrugged, her gaze lost in the urban landscape out the car window. "Did something bad happen?" Mrs. Zilder insisted, noticing the child's tear-filled eyes. "They said things about Uncle Robert," Louisa murmured. The housekeeper frowned, worried. "What things, dear?" "That he's mean. That he destroys forests to build buildings. That he only helped me to get on TV." Mrs. Zilder gripped the steering wheel tightly. She had known Robert since he was an ambitious young man, and despite all his flaws, she knew that his kindness towards Louisa was genuine. "People say a lot of nonsense when they don't know the truth," she finally replied. "The important thing is what you feel, what you see with your own eyes." When Robert arrived home that night, he found Louisa sitting on the living room sofa, hugging a cushion, with a thoughtful expression. "I bought your clay," he announced, placing the package on the table. "How was your first day of school?" Louisa hesitated before answering. "Uncle Robert, are you a bad person?" The question hit Robert like a punch to the gut. He sat beside her, carefully choosing his words. "Why are you asking that?" "The boys at school said you destroy poor people's homes to build rich people's buildings." Robert sighed deeply. How to explain the complexities of the real estate world, the difficult business decisions, to a 10-year-old child? "Louisa, I've made many mistakes in my life. I've made decisions thinking only of money, without caring about the consequences. But that doesn't mean I'm bad. Have you ever taken someone's home? My developments have always followed the law, but yes, some of them meant the relocation of people, not always in the best way." The honesty of the answer surprised even Robert. He had never admitted it to anyone, not even to himself. Louisa was silent for a few moments, processing the information. "But you saved me," she finally said. "A bad person wouldn't do that, would they?" Robert felt his eyes sting. "I hope not." That night, for the first time, Louisa asked Robert to read her a story before bed. He chose The Little Prince, a book his mother used to read to him in his childhood. When he reached the part about the fox being tamed, he noticed that Louisa had fallen asleep with her head resting on his shoulder. Carefully, he adjusted her in bed and watched her serene face for a few minutes. How had a child managed in such a short time to make him question a lifetime of decisions? The next morning, Robert found a note taped to the refrigerator door. "You're not bad. You were just lost." Beside the note, there was a small drawing of a man in a suit holding a girl's hand. That same day, the headline of the Daily Chronicle read, "Albury Construction Board votes to remove president." The report detailed how the administrative board had decided, by a 4-to-1 vote, to temporarily remove Robert from the presidency, citing emotional decisions that compromised the company's future. Robert read the news with Louisa sitting beside him, eating cereal. "What does that mean?" she asked, pointing to the headline. "It means I won't be working at that company anymore," he replied, surprising himself with his own tranquility. "And is that bad?" Robert reflected for a moment. "It should be. I built that company from scratch. But honestly, I don't feel bad." And it was true. A strange sense of freedom enveloped him. For the first time in decades, he didn't have to be Robert Albury, the feared real estate magnate. He could just be Robert. His reflections were interrupted by the phone. It was Caroline, his ex-wife, with whom he maintained a cordial relationship despite their bitter divorce 5 years prior. "Robert, I just saw the news." "Are you okay?" "I'm great, actually," he replied, surprising her. "Never been better. Henry told me about the girl. He said you're obsessed, that it's affecting your judgment. Your brother never understood anything beyond numbers, Caroline. Some things are more important than quarterly reports." A silence settled before Caroline replied, "Who are you and what have you done with the Robert Ulbury I knew?" He laughed, a genuine sound he hadn't made in years. "I'm asking myself the same thing." After hanging up, Robert found Louisa on the porch, modeling something with her new clay. He approached silently and observed. She was creating a small city with tiny houses and people. "What are you doing?" he asked, sitting beside her. "A city where everyone has a home," Louisa replied, focused on her work. "No people sleeping on the streets." Robert felt a pang in his chest. In his wanderings through Newport Beach, how many times had he passed by homeless people without truly seeing them? "It's a beautiful city," he commented. "You could build a city like this for real," Louisa said, looking at him with her penetrating brown eyes. "I know how." The simplicity of that suggestion hit Robert with the force of a revelation. All his life, he had used his talent to build monuments to luxury, ignoring those who truly needed a roof over their heads. "You know what, Louisa? You're right." That same afternoon, Robert made a call to his lawyer, instructing him to initiate the formal adoption process for Louisa. Then he called an old friend at the city housing department, scheduling a meeting to discuss possible partnerships in social housing projects. The real estate magnate, who built palaces for billionaires, now dreamed of simple homes for those who had nothing. And all because of a girl who, buried in a construction site, had ended up unearthing something much more precious, his humanity. Chapter 4. Sacrifices and Revelations. The following months brought drastic changes to Robert and Louisa's lives. Removed from the presidency of the construction company, Robert sold his minority stake in the shares, retaining only the majority control that guaranteed him a modest income compared to previous standards. The mansion in Pelican Hill continued to be his home with Louisa, but several employees were dismissed, with only Mrs. Zilda remaining, who refused to leave them even with the offer of a reduced salary. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, Robert was sitting on the porch, analyzing plans for affordable housing, when he noticed Louisa observing him with curiosity. "What are you doing?" she asked, approaching with a cup of juice that Mrs. Zilda had prepared. "I'm drawing houses," he replied, showing her the sketches. "Houses for people who don't have a place to live." The girl's eyes sparkled as she saw the simple but functional drawings. "They're like the little houses I made with clay." Robert smiled, running his hand through the girl's now longer hair. "Yes, you inspired me. Remember the land where I found you? I'm planning to use part of it to build a housing complex." Louisa hugged him spontaneously, a rare gesture that still caught him by surprise. Those small moments of genuine affection were worth more than all the millions he had accumulated over the years. The following week, while attending a meeting at the city housing department to discuss his social project, Robert received a call from Mrs. Zilda. "Boss, the girl has a high fever. I've already called the doctor, but I think you should come home." Robert left the meeting immediately. Upon arriving home, he found Louisa lying in her bed, pale and with cheeks flushed from fever. Dr. Evans, the family doctor for years, was examining the girl's throat. "What's wrong with her, doctor?" "Severe tonsillitis. We need to start treatment immediately. I'll prescribe antibiotics and recommend hospitalization if the fever doesn't break in the next 24 hours. Robert nodded, feeling a pang in his chest at seeing Louisa so fragile. "It'll be okay, little one," he whispered, holding her warm hand, but it wasn't. In the following days, the fever persisted, and additional tests revealed a bacterial infection that had spread to her respiratory system. Dr. Evans recommended immediate hospitalization at Samaritan Medical Center, one of the best and most expensive in the city. "I need to be frank, Robert," the doctor said privately. "She needs specialized treatment with state-of-the-art antibiotics. Her immune system seems compromised, likely due to the conditions she was subjected to before you found her." At the hospital, Robert stayed by Louisa's side day and night. His phone rang constantly, but he ignored all calls except those from Mrs. Zilda. It was she who alerted him to the increasingly complicated financial situation. "Boss," the bank called. "They said the card was declined for the first hospital payment." Robert rubbed his eyes, exhausted. "Use the backup card." "I already tried, sir." It was also declined. For the first time in decades, Robert Albury faced real financial difficulties. His departure from the construction company, generous donations to social projects, and now the hospital expenses had consumed a large part of his liquid reserves. His most valuable assets were invested in long-term projects that could not be liquidated immediately. That night, while Louisa slept under the effect of medication, Robert took a mental inventory of his assets. The mansion, the cars, works of art, everything would take time to convert into cash. And the hospital demanded immediate payment. His gaze fell on the gold watch on his wrist, his father's only inheritance, a simple piece that his father, a bricklayer, had built with his life savings to give to his son when he opened his first construction company. The next morning, Robert sought out the hospital's financial director. "I need one more week to organize the resources," he explained, trying to maintain his dignity. "The girl cannot interrupt her treatment. I'm sorry, Mr. Albury, but the hospital cannot extend any more credit. Your reputation isn't what it used to be since you left the construction company." Robert felt his blood boil, but he controlled himself. "What if I leave something as collateral?" He unfastened the watch from his wrist and placed it on the table. The director looked disdainfully at the piece. "That's not worth even a fraction of what the full treatment will cost. This watch is solid gold, with a Swiss movement. It was my father's. Mr. Albury, with all due respect, call Anthony Gadsby from Gadsby Jewelers. He knows the value of this piece." An hour later, with the watch appraised at a considerable value due to its rarity and origin, the hospital accepted the collateral to continue treatment for another 2 weeks. Robert felt an emptiness as he saw his most precious possession go. But he knew it was a small price to pay for Louisa's life. Upon returning to the girl's room, he found her awake, looking out the window. "Uncle Robert," she called in a weak voice. "Did you sell your watch?" Surprised, he approached the bed. "How do you know that?" "I heard the nurse talking. She said you gave your watch to pay for my treatment." Robert sat beside her, trying to smile. "Don't worry about it. It's just a watch. But it was your father's. You told me its story." "Some things are more important than objects, Louisa. You are more important." The girl was silent for a moment, her eyes moist. "No one ever cared about me like that before." "Gosh," she finally whispered. Robert felt a lump in his throat. "Do you remember your life before I found you?" It was a question he had avoided for months, following the psychologist's recommendation not to force traumatic memories. But now something in Louisa's expression suggested she wanted to talk. "I remember some things," she replied, her fingers playing with the edge of the sheet. "I remember living in a place with many children. It wasn't bad, but no one really saw me. An orphanage. I think so. Then a woman took me away. She said I was going to have a family." Robert held her hand, encouraging her to continue. "And what happened?" "The woman sold me to bad people. They made me beg for money on the street. If I didn't get enough, they would hit me." Silent tears streamed down the girl's face. Robert felt a cold fury rise in his chest. "One day I tried to run away. The man caught me and said he was going to teach me a lesson. He put me in a box. He said he would only take me out when I learned to obey. I remember being carried, earth falling. Then I only remember you finding me." Robert hugged her carefully so as not to disturb the tubes and sensors. "No one will ever hurt you again, Louisa. I promise." In the following days, Louisa's health began to improve gradually. Robert remained by her side, reading stories and discussing his plans for the housing project he called Hope Village. The story of the watch, however, leaked to the press. A nurse, impressed by the former magnate's gesture, shared the case with a journalist friend. Soon the headline, "Ex-billionaire sells historic heirloom to save rescued girl," was circulating in newspapers and on social media. The public's reaction surprised Robert. Instead of the usual criticism, comments of support flooded social media. Ordinary people offered to help, some even sending money to the hospital in Louisa's name. One afternoon, while Robert dozed in the armchair beside Louisa's bed, he was awakened by a nurse. "Mr. Albury, there's a lady wanting to see you. She says it's urgent." In the waiting room, Robert found a simple woman, appearing to be about 60 years old. "My name is Grace," she introduced herself shyly. "You don't know me, but I know you well." Robert frowned, confused. 3 months ago, my grandson Matthew was dying of a kidney disease. We needed a very expensive imported medication. One day, an envelope arrived with the exact amount we needed. Anonymous. "Madam, I don't know." "Please let me finish," she interrupted gently. "That money saved my grandson. Then we found out it came from you. A social worker told us you've been helping many families anonymously. When we heard about your gesture with the watch," she opened a small purse and took out an envelope. "This is from our community. It's not much, but everyone contributed. For the girl's treatment." Robert, stunned, opened the envelope and found several dollars, most in small bills, some even crumpled and worn. "Money from simple people, people who barely had enough for themselves. I can't accept." "Yes, you can," Grace insisted. "You helped us when we needed it. Now it's our turn." As they talked, more people arrived. A man in a wheelchair, a young mother with her baby, an elderly person leaning on a cane. All had similar stories. They had received anonymous help from Robert when he still had resources. "How did you find out it was me?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "You were always discreet," a woman explained. "But people like us, who live in the communities, notice when someone truly cares." In the following weeks, a wave of solidarity formed around Robert and Louisa. Mrs. Zilda, moved by the mobilization, organized the supporters. Food, clothes, offers of volunteer work for the housing project, everything arrived in a constant flow. When Louisa was finally discharged, a small crowd awaited them at the hospital exit. People of all kinds, united by the desire to return the generosity they had received. "Who are all these people?" Louisa asked, leaning on Robert as she slowly walked to the car. "They're friends," he replied, as surprised as she was. "Friends I didn't even know I had." Back at the mansion, Robert found a letter from the hospital informing him that the remaining expenses had been fully paid by anonymous donations. Along with the letter was his gold watch, recovered by a community collection. That night, with Louisa sleeping peacefully in her room, Robert sat on the porch contemplating the city lights in the distance. His phone rang. It was Henry, his ex-brother-in-law. "I'm seeing you everywhere in the media," Henry said bluntly. "The board is willing to reconsider your removal. Your new public image could be beneficial for the company." Robert chuckled softly. "Tell the board I appreciate it, but I have other plans now." "What plans?" "To become a social worker." "You built an empire, Robert, and now I'm going to build something different, something worth more." After hanging up, Robert turned his eyes to the Hope Village plans spread on the table, the land where he had planned to build another luxury condominium, where he had found Louisa, would now be home to dozens of families who had never dreamed of having a roof over their heads. A small note, written in Louisa's still imperfect handwriting, was attached to one of the drawings, "Houses for Real People." Robert smiled, putting the note away with all the others the girl had written since her arrival. The magnate who had lost almost everything began to realize that, in fact, he had never been so rich. Chapter 5. Building a Dream. The sun had not yet risen when Robert parked his pickup truck, which had replaced the luxurious BMW, on the land where, months ago, he had found Louisa. The girl slept in the passenger seat, wrapped in a thin blanket. He smiled as he contemplated her serene face, so different from the frightened expression of the child he had rescued from that metal box. "Louisa," he called softly, touching her shoulder. "We're here." The girl slowly opened her eyes, adapting to the dim light of dawn. "Why did we come so early?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "I want you to see something special." Robert helped her out of the truck and led her to the highest point of the land. The spacious area, once destined to be the site of another luxury development, was now marked with stakes and colorful ropes that formed the outline of several small constructions. "What is all this?" Louisa inquired, observing the markings on the ground. "It's Hope Village," Robert replied, pointing to different areas. "Here will be the houses. There a daycare center, over in the corner, a health clinic, and right in the center, a plaza with many trees." The girl's eyes sparkled with excitement. It's just like what I made with clay. That exactly. Your model was my inspiration. They remained there, embraced, as the sun began to rise on the horizon, gradually illuminating the land that would soon transform the lives of many families. Uncle Robert, when will the houses be ready? He sighed, running his hand through the girl's hair. It won't be. Quick, Louisa. We lost the city permit for changing the original project. We're facing bureaucratic obstacles and resources are limited now. But you'll do it, right? You always get what you want. Robert smiled with a mixture of tenderness and melancholy. I'll try. With all the strength I have. In the following weeks, the land became the center of Robert and Louisa's lives. Every morning, after dropping the girl off at school, he would go to the site, working tirelessly to turn the project into reality. With few financial resources, Robert returned to his roots, literally getting his hands dirty, as he hadn't done since his days working with his father. On a particularly hot Saturday, while mixing concrete for the foundation of the first house, Robert noticed a small group of people approaching. He recognized Grace, the woman who had sought him out at the hospital, and others who had contributed to Louisa's treatment. "Good morning, Mr. Olbury," Grace greeted him. "We came to help." Robert looked surprised at the group of about 10 people, all dressed for work. "You don't have to do this," he said, embarrassed. "You didn't have to help us when you did either," replied a middle-aged man, extending his hand. "I'm Sebastian. You paid for my daughter's surgery when we lost our health insurance." One by one, they introduced themselves. Each had a similar story: anonymous financial help at a crucial moment, support that had changed the course of their lives. Robert didn't remember all the cases. He had helped so many people in recent months that faces and names blurred in his memory. "I don't know what to say," Robert confessed, visibly moved. "You don't need to say anything," Grace replied with a warm smile. "Just tell us where we can start." That day the work progressed like never before. Hands calloused from hard labor joined hands previously accustomed only to signing million-dollar contracts. Sebastian was a bricklayer. His wife, Teresa, cooked to feed the workers. Claude, a former homeless man Robert had helped find a job, proved skilled with electrical installations. When Louisa arrived at the site after school, she was amazed by the transformation. The foundations of 3 houses were already outlined, and people worked in harmony under the command of her Uncle Robert, who seemed happier than she had ever seen him. "Hello." "Dear," Grace greeted, approaching Louisa. "You must be the famous Louisa." "I'm Mrs. Grace. Why am I famous?" the girl asked, confused. "Because you changed that man's heart over there," the woman replied, pointing to Robert, who was instructing a group on mixing concrete. "And when you change a heart like his, you change the world." As the days passed, the number of volunteers grew. News of the project spread through the community and attracted more people willing to contribute. A retired architect offered his services for free. Engineering students from UCLA showed up on weekends to help. But not everything was rosy. On a Wednesday morning, Robert arrived at the site and found a city stop-work order affixed to the makeshift entrance gate. "What's happening?" asked Louisa, who had insisted on skipping school to accompany him that day. "Someone doesn't want us to build here," Robert replied, examining the official document. At the Department of Public Works, he discovered that neighbors of the future community had filed a lawsuit alleging that the project would devalue the area and attract undesirable elements. Robert recognized the hand of his former associates behind the maneuver. It was their way of retaliating for his refusal to return to the construction company. "Now what?" Louisa asked when he returned, dejected. "I don't know. We need a lawyer, but I can't afford the best ones like before." The girl was silent for a moment, then took out her notebook and began to write something. Robert watched her, impressed by her concentration. "What are you doing?" "Writing a letter," she replied without taking her eyes off the paper. "To the newspaper. I'm going to tell our story." "Louisa, I don't think that will solve People need to know the truth," she interrupted, determined. "They helped us before. They'll help us again." Louisa's letter, written with the surprising sincerity and eloquence of a 10-year-old child, was sent to several media outlets. Only a small community newspaper published it initially, but it was enough. The story of the girl rescued from a box and the businessman who had given up everything to build homes for the needy touched hearts. In the following days, more volunteers arrived, and along with them something unexpected, a young lawyer named Raphael Montgomery. "I read Louisa's letter," he explained to Robert. "My mother lived in the neighborhoods in south-central Los Angeles that you helped to revitalize. Thanks to that, she was able to open a small business and send me to law school. I want to give back." With Raphael's help, Robert managed to overturn the stop work order, proving that the project met all urban planning regulations and would even benefit the surrounding area with improved infrastructure. The condition imposed by the city was that part of the land be designated for a public school, a requirement that Robert not only accepted but expanded, donating an even larger area than requested. In 6 months of hard work, the first phase of Hope Village began to take shape. 5 simple but dignified homes, built with sustainable techniques that lowered costs without compromising quality. Robert applied all his construction knowledge, now directed at maximizing comfort and durability, with minimal resources. Louisa followed everything closely. Her self-imposed responsibility was to document each step of the process. With a thick notebook gifted by Mrs. Zilda, she recorded the names of all the volunteers, the donations received, the stories of the families who would receive the homes. "What are you writing so much in that notebook?" Robert asked one night as they returned exhausted to the house. "I'm saving memories," she replied simply, "so I never forget how it all began." The selection of the first families to occupy the homes was an exciting and challenging process. Robert established clear criteria: priority for families with children, homeless people, elderly without family support. Mrs. Grace and other community leaders formed a council to evaluate the applications. When the first 5 families were chosen, Louisa made a point of meeting each one personally. Accompanied by Robert, she visited the places where they lived: makeshift shacks, unsanitary occupations, temporary shelters. One of these visits deeply affected the girl. The Santos family, Mariana, a 28-year-old single mother, and her 3 children, the oldest 9, lived in a single room behind a bar. The father had left without contact, and Mariana worked as a cleaner to support the children. "They're going to get a whole house just for them?" asked the youngest son, only 4 years old, when Robert explained the project. "Yes," Louisa replied, crouching down to his height. "A house with a bedroom, living room, kitchen, and bathroom. And a small yard to play in." The boy's eyes widened as if he had been promised a palace. That night on the way back, Louisa remained quiet, thoughtful. "Is everything all right?" Robert asked, concerned by her silence. "Uncle Robert, why do some people have so much and others so little?" The question, in its childish simplicity, carried a philosophical weight that caught Robert off guard. "It's complicated, Louisa. The world isn't fair. But it could be, couldn't it? If people like you wanted it to be." Robert reflected on his decades accumulating fortune, building mansions and luxury condominiums while ignoring the reality just a few miles away. Yes, it could be. And that's what we're trying to do, even if it's just a small beginning. Finally, after 8 months of intense work, the big day arrived, the inauguration of the first houses of Hope Village. A small ceremony was organized, with the presence of all volunteers, local authorities, and, of course, the beneficiary families. Robert, wearing jeans and a simple shirt, so different from his impeccable suits of yesteryear, seemed nervous as he prepared to speak. Louisa, sensing his anxiety, held his hand. "You'll do well," she encouraged. "Just speak from the heart." Before the small crowd gathered, Robert took a deep breath. "I didn't prepare a speech," he began, "because words cannot express what I feel today. This place, this village, is not just a set of houses. It is the result of something I had forgotten existed: solidarity." His voice faltered for a moment, but he continued. "For years I built tall, luxurious buildings, thinking I was creating something important, but I never saw the true joy I see today in the eyes of these families. I never felt what I feel now." He looked at Louisa, who smiled beside him. "All of this began when I found a girl buried on this very land. I thought I was saving her life, but the truth is, she saved mine." After the ceremony, as the families excitedly explored their new homes, Louisa pulled Robert to a specific corner of the land. "I want to show you something," she said, guiding him to a newly planted small garden. In the center of the garden, there was a simple plaque. It was here that a life was unearthed, and many others found hope. Robert felt his eyes well up. "Did you write that?" Louisa nodded. "Mrs. Grace helped me. Do you like it?" He hugged the girl tightly, unable to express in words what he felt. In that exact spot where he had found her months ago, now grew not only a garden but a new purpose for his life. That night, back at the mansion, which now seemed too big and unnecessarily luxurious for the two of them, Robert found Louisa on the porch, writing in her notebook by the light of a lamp. "What are you writing now?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Names," the girl replied, "of all the people who need homes. The list is long, Uncle Robert." He looked over her shoulder and saw pages and pages of carefully written names, many accompanied by small observations. Family of 5, elderly lady, alone. Father with special needs child. "That's a lot of people," Robert commented, feeling the weight of the responsibility. "But we have time," Louisa replied, with the wisdom that always surprised him. "And now we have friends to help." Robert smiled, observing the city lights in the distance. For decades, he had seen that panorama as a field of business conquests. Now he saw it as a mosaic of interconnected lives, of people who, as he had belatedly discovered, were much more important than buildings or profits. "You know, Louisa," he said thoughtfully, "I think we can sell this mansion. It's too big for the two of us, and the money would build many houses in the village." The girl looked up from her notebook, assessing him with a serious expression. "Won't you miss it here?" Robert looked around at the expensive furniture, the valuable works of art, all the luxury that once defined his status. "Not at all," he replied sincerely. "What really matters are not the walls that surround us, but the people with whom we share our days." Louisa closed her notebook and hugged him, resting her head on his chest. "I think I already knew that," she whispered. "Ever since the day you took me out of that box." Chapter 6. A New Beginning. 5 years had passed since the inauguration of the first houses of Hope Village. What began as a small project of 5 residences had transformed into a vibrant community with over 100 families. Robert Albury's old mansion in Newport Beach had been sold, and the money invested in the project's expansion. Now Robert and Louisa, who was already 15, lived in a simple and welcoming house within the village itself. On a sunny Sunday morning, the residents gathered in the central plaza for the community's monthly assembly. Robert, with his hair now completely grey, but with a renewed sparkle in his eyes, watched with satisfaction as Louisa conducted the meeting with surprising ease for her age. "We need to discuss the proposed expansion of the Artisan Cooperative," the teenager announced, consulting her notes. "Mrs. Teresa, can you explain it to everyone?" A middle-aged woman stood up, explaining how the group of artisan women in the village had received a large order from a home decor store at the South Bay Mall. The problem was that they needed more equipment and materials to meet the demand. Robert listened attentively, as always impressed by the organizational capacity of that community. Hope Village had become much more than a housing complex. It was a true experiment in self-management. Residents collectively decided on common problems, from the maintenance of public areas to the administration of the community school. After the assembly, Robert walked with Louisa along the tree-lined paths of the village. Children played in the streets without fear. Elderly people chatted in the shade of mango trees planted in the early days of the project, and music emanated from some open windows. It was Sunday, a day to celebrate life. "Uncle Robert, we need to talk about something," Louisa said, her expression suddenly serious. "Of course." "Did something happen?" he asked, concerned by the teenager's tone. "I received a letter from the public defender's office," she replied, taking an envelope from the cloth bag she always carried. "They found information about my biological family." Robert felt a pang in his chest. Despite the adoption process having been completed years ago, making Louisa legally his daughter, the fear of losing her had never completely left him. "And what did the letter say?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "My biological mother was very young when she had me. She gave me up for adoption, but the process wasn't done correctly. That's how I ended up in the system, and then—" "Well, you know," Robert nodded, remembering the terrible story Louisa had told him in the hospital years ago. how she had been irregularly removed from an orphanage and then exploited by people who forced her to beg on the streets. "Does she want to meet you?" Robert asked, trying to hide his fear of the answer. "Not exactly," Louisa replied, looking at the horizon. "Actually, she passed away a few years ago. But I have a grandmother and 2 uncles who didn't know about my existence until recently. They want to meet me." Robert took a deep breath, processing the information. "How do you feel about this? Curious? Confused?" "I don't really know what to think," Louisa admitted. "But I want you to come with me when I meet them. You're my father, no matter what happens." Louisa's words hit Robert like a ray of sunshine after a long storm. Father. He had never married, never had biological children. His whole life had been dedicated to building an empire that he now realized was made of sand. But this girl, this extraordinary young woman, whom fate had placed in his path in the most improbable way, had given him the title that no money could buy. "Of course I'll go with you," he replied, hugging her. "I'll always be by your side." In the following weeks, Robert underwent regular medical checkups. For months he had been feeling unusual fatigue, joint pain, a weakness he attributed to age and intense physical work in the village. The results were not encouraging: a degenerative heart condition, aggravated by years of stress and the intense lifestyle he had led as a businessman. "You need to drastically reduce physical activity, Mr. Albury," the doctor recommended, "and start medication immediately." Robert nodded but knew he wouldn't follow all the recommendations. There was too much work to be done, too many lives to be transformed. He accepted the medicine, but continued his routine in the village, only reducing the heaviest tasks. He didn't tell Louisa about the diagnosis. The teenager was already anxious about the imminent meeting with her biological family, scheduled for the following week. Robert didn't want to add more worries. The meeting took place in a small restaurant in downtown Newport Beach. Louisa's maternal grandmother, Mrs. Helen, was a dignified woman in her 70s, with the same penetrating brown eyes as her granddaughter. Her uncles, Paul and Andrew, seemed nervous but genuinely moved. "You're the spitting image of your mother," Mrs. Helen said, holding Louisa's hands tenderly. "Joanna would have been so happy to see the wonderful woman you're becoming." The conversation flowed surprisingly well. The family explained that Joanna was only 16 when she became pregnant. Pressured by her boyfriend and without support, she gave the baby up for adoption without telling anyone. Years later, regretting it, she tried to find her daughter, but the irregular adoption process made the search impossible. "She never forgave herself," explained Paul, the elder uncle. "She spent years looking for you." Louisa listened to everything with impressive maturity, asking questions, sharing a little of her own story, always keeping Robert included in the conversation, proudly introducing him as her father. On the way back to the village, Robert noticed that Louisa was unusually quiet. "Are you thinking about your biological mother?" he asked gently. "I'm thinking about how strange life is," she replied. "If I hadn't been separated from my mother, if I hadn't gone through all that, I would never have been found by you. We would never have created Hope Village. So many people wouldn't have a home now." Robert reflected on the comment. It was true. Louisa's suffering had, in some mysterious way, triggered a series of events that transformed not only their lives, but the lives of hundreds of people. "Sometimes, the most difficult things lead us to the most important places," he commented. "Like that phrase you always say, I built many buildings, but only here did I see people truly living," Louisa added with a smile. In the following weeks, Robert's health visibly deteriorated. He tried to hide it, but Louisa was too observant not to notice his increasing difficulty breathing, his pallor, the moments of confusion. "You need to rest more," she insisted. "Worried? I'm fine," he replied, stubborn as ever. "I just need to finish the new community area project." The truth was that Robert knew his time was running out. Discreetly, he had put all his affairs in order. He transferred legal ownership of the village land to a cooperative formed by the residents themselves, with Louisa as the legal guardian. He documented everything, ensuring that his legacy would continue long after he was gone. On a particularly hot summer afternoon, while supervising the construction of a small amphitheater in the village, Robert felt a sharp pain in his chest. He staggered, leaning against a newly built wall. Sebastian, now the construction coordinator, immediately realized something was wrong. "Mr. Albury, are you all right?" Robert tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come out. His vision darkened at the edges. His last conscious thought was of Louisa. Would she know how to continue without him? When he woke up, he was in a hospital bed with Louisa sitting beside him, holding his hand. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "You gave me quite a scare," she said, trying to smile. "Sorry," Robert murmured, his voice weak. "I think I overdid it a bit. The doctor said you had a heart attack. Why didn't you tell me you were sick?" Robert sighed, unable to lie to those penetrating eyes. "I didn't want to worry you. You've been through so much already. And do you think that makes me weaker or stronger?" Louisa asked, her voice firm despite the tears. "We went through all this together, remember? Always together." In the days that followed, Robert remained in the hospital, surrounded not only by Louisa, but by a constant rotation of visitors from Hope Village. Mrs. Grace brought homemade soup, ignoring the nurse's prohibitions. Sebastian reported on the progress of the construction. Children left colorful drawings for the founder of the village. "Look," Louisa commented as she organized the accumulating gifts and cards. "All these people love you." Robert watched, marveling at the community they had created together. "I never imagined it would end up like this," he confided. "When I was younger, I thought success meant having the tallest skyscraper with my name on top. And now? Now I know that success is seeing happy people in homes I helped build. It's seeing you grow strong and determined, despite everything you've been through." After 2 weeks, Robert was discharged with strict orders for absolute rest. Against his will, he had to accept a wheelchair for his weakest days. Louisa naturally took on the role of caregiver, reorganizing the household routine, administering his medications, and still maintaining her responsibilities in the village. On a quiet afternoon, as they watched the sunset from the porch of their simple home, Robert handed Louisa an envelope. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside the envelope were official documents transferring all his remaining assets, some properties, investments and accounts, to a fund dedicated to the maintenance and expansion of Hope Village, with Louisa as the principal administrator when she turned 18. "But this is all you have," she stammered, impressed. "No," Robert corrected with a serene smile. "What I have that is most valuable is not on any paper. It's you. It's this community. It's what we built together." Louisa hugged him, crying silently. "I'm not ready to lose you," she whispered. "And you won't lose me," he assured, stroking her hair. "I will always be with you, in every brick of this village, in every smile of the children who grow up here." In the months that followed, despite his physical limitations, Robert continued to contribute to the village in any way he could. From his wheelchair, he gave construction consultations, mediated community conflicts with his acquired wisdom, and most importantly, told stories to the children who always gathered on his porch on Sunday afternoons. Their favorite story, of course, was how he found Louisa, and how together they transformed a construction site into a home for hundreds of people. Hope Village continued to grow, not just in size, but in recognition. Journalists, researchers, and NGO representatives began to visit the site, studying its model of self-management and sustainability. Similar projects began to emerge in other parts of the country, inspired by what Robert and Louisa had achieved. On his 65th birthday, Robert was surprised by a large celebration organized by the village residents. In the center of the main plaza, a statue had been erected, not of him, as he had feared when Louisa blindfolded him before leading him there, but of two intertwined hands, one large and one small, sculpted in bronze. The plaque simply read, "It was here that someone heard a sound no one else wanted to hear." Robert immediately recognized the words. Louisa had written in her notebook years ago. The party lasted all day. There was music, dancing, typical foods prepared by the residents themselves. Children ran freely. Elderly people shared stories. Young people organized games and presentations. It was the perfect manifestation of the community spirit they had cultivated. At the end of the night, when almost everyone had retired, Robert remained in the plaza with Louisa, contemplating the stars. "You've accomplished something extraordinary here," the young woman said, adjusting the blanket over her father's legs. Robert smiled, shaking his head. "We accomplished it Louisa, together. And you will continue when I no longer can. Don't talk like that, she pleaded. Her voice choked. It's life, my daughter. We all have our time. The important thing is how we use it. He held her hand, his eyes reflecting the stars. I spent much of my time accumulating things that meant nothing. But these last few years with you, with this community, have been the most fulfilling and meaningful I have ever lived. Louisa rested her head on Robert's shoulder, as she did when she was a child. You know what impresses me most? He continued. How everything changed from a single moment, from a single decision. If I hadn't stopped the machines that day to listen to that faint sound coming from the ground, it was destiny, Louisa completed. We were meant to meet. Robert contemplated the sleeping village before him, the small houses, the school, the plaza, the community center. It had all begun with an almost imperceptible sound and the decision to stop and listen. I built many buildings, he murmured, repeating the phrase that had become almost a mantra, but only here did I see people truly living. Louisa smiled, knowing that these words, like the legacy they built together, would live far beyond them. Today, 10 years later, Hope Village is an internationally recognized model of sustainable community development. Louisa Albury, now 25, leads the project that has expanded to other regions of the country. The small notebook where she recorded names and stories has transformed into a community archive that preserves the memory of every person who found a home in the village. Robert is no longer physically present, but his spirit lives in every corner, in every smile, in every new house built. His legacy is not the skyscrapers he once built, but the lives he helped transform. And it all started with a sound from the earth, a call that only a truly attentive soul could hear. As Louisa always tells visitors who come to the village, if one day they ask where it all began, point here. Because it was here that someone heard a sound no one else wanted to hear. Dear listeners, we hope Robert and Louisa's journey has touched your hearts as much as it touched ours. Stories like this remind us that small acts of compassion can trigger profound transformations, not only in our lives, but in the lives of entire communities. To continue being moved by narratives that explore the strength of the human spirit and the power of second chances, we have a special playlist with other inspiring stories. Find it by clicking here on the side. If this story awakened something in you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the beauty of human connections. We'll see you in the comments to find out what moment in this story touched your heart the most. Was it Louisa's rescue, Robert's transformation, or the impact they both had on the community? Share your reflection with us.